Raising an animal in your home, be it a dog, cat, or other animals, can be quite difficult. However, have you ever wondered how capable a wild animal would be regarding raising a human? In these 10 instances, humans were found to have been separated from their families and were raised in the wild. Number 10. Back in 1867, hunters were traveling through a jungle in India when they noticed a young boy and wolf in the distance. They watched the pair for a moment and noticed that the boy followed the wolf into its den. However, this wasn't a normal little boy. He was seen walking on all fours eating food off the ground. The men lured the wolf out of the den a short while later and shot it. They then found the boy and learned that he had been living like a wild animal. He would tear off clothing, growl like an animal, and generally act as though he had been raised by wolves. As it would turn out, he had been. The boy was named Dina Sanakar and was taken in at a local orphanage, with the doctors and experts believing he had been living in the wild for his entire life. He was just 6 years old at the time of his discovery. He was eventually converted to a normal human diet, but was never able to speak his native language. Number 9. In 1990, a young boy was found in the Andes region of Peru, traveling alongside a group of wild mountain goats. The individuals who found him claimed that the boy appeared to have been behaving like a wild animal, so a rescue crew was called to take the little boy in. He was referred to as the Andes Goat Boy for many years. It is assumed that he managed to survive in the wild by drinking the milk of the goats and eating roots and berries from the mountains as food. He behaved like one of his fellow goat friends and developed the characteristics of a wild animal. He would only ever walk on all fours, and his hands and feet were severely calloused and hardened from the rough terrain. Experts say that his hands appeared more like hooves than any human hand they had ever seen. He was never able to communicate like a normal boy, but he was able to communicate with goats flawlessly. The boy was later researched by a team of investigators from Kansas University, and he was given the name Daniel. He was just 8 years old when he was initially found, and researchers believe he had been abandoned in the wild a short while after his birth. Number 8. In September of 1946, a group of hunters were traveling through the Syrian desert when they found a young boy who had been traveling with a group of gazelles. As you've probably assumed by now, the boy wasn't your average human boy. He appeared to be in extremely bad health and was estimated to be between 10 and 14 years old. The hunters attempted to capture the boy to take him back to civilization, but the hunters were unable to catch him. Reports indicate that the boy was able to run at speeds of 50 kilometers per hour, so reinforcements needed to be called in. The boy was eventually captured after an army jeep chased him down, with helpers jumping out to tie the boy up so that he couldn't harm them or run away. He was very thin, but the men say that he was unbelievably strong for a boy his size and age. The boy was taken to a Syrian mental institution where he lived out the remainder of his life. Number 7. Bello was the name given to a young boy that was eventually dubbed the Nigerian Chimp Boy. Bello was found in 1996 when he was around 2 years old. He was mentally and physically handicapped, but the exact cause of his disability is unknown. It is assumed that he had likely been disabled since birth, but this was never proven. Researchers believe that he was left in the wilderness by his parents when he was just 6 months old, which is quite common in certain areas of Africa. The boy was found to have been taken in and raised by chimpanzees, as he was found with the chimp family in the Falgore forest, now living about 150 kilometers from where experts believe he was initially abandoned. Bello's story began to spread around 2002, after he had spent many years at an assisted living facility. Workers say that Bello would only walk hunched over, dragging his hands on the ground like a monkey. He would jump around in his bunk at night and refuse to calm down. He was incredibly destructive and disruptive to other children, and would become violent very easily. By the time he was 8 years old, he had learned to calm down, but still showed many of the qualities of a chimpanzee, such as keeping his hands cupped and making monkey-like noises when he was upset. Number 6. John Sabunya was the name given to a boy who was born sometime in the 1980s. John ran away from home when he was around 2 or 3 years old after seeing his father take the life of his mother right in front of him. He ran into the African jungle where he hid from his father, later being adopted by a group of African monkeys. In 1991, John was found by a local woman who lived in a nearby village. He had learned to climb trees and was living in them like a monkey. The woman ran back to the village and asked two locals for help. They returned to the forest to help the boy, but he was very resistant to their efforts. He became violent, and the members of his monkey family began throwing rocks at the rescuers. He was successfully captured a short while later and taken in for a medical examination. Doctors say that his entire body was covered in thick hair, a disorder known as hypertrichosis. When he would use the bathroom, he would eject worms and parasites that were over 3 feet long and needed intensive medical care. After being cleaned up, scars were found all over his body from a life in the wild. His knees were scarred from being dragged across the rough jungle ground, but he was eventually identified as John Sebunya, the boy who had gone missing in the 80s. The woman who found him was given custody over him, as she ran a foundation that cared for orphan children who had been abandoned by their families. He learned how to talk later in life, and he eventually began singing for the African Children's Choir. Number 5. Traian Calderar was a young boy from Romania who lived in the wild for at least 3 years after being separated from his family as a result of spousal abuse. The boy was 7 years old when he was found, but he was estimated to have only been the size of a 3-year-old. He was unable to speak and was found to have been living in the wild completely nude. He had fashioned himself a cardboard box that he covered in a plastic sheet to stay out of the weather, but was in extremely poor health. He had rickets and frostbite when rescuers found him, and doctors stated that he would have likely passed away if he were left in the wild for much longer. It is believed that he survived with the assistance of several stray dogs that lived nearby. He was found near a dog that police believe he had been eating. He bore all the telltale signs of being raised in the wild, and his mother eventually returned to his aid once she learned of his return. She said she was forced out of her home after her husband had become abusive toward her. She was unable to take her child with her because the husband refused to let the boy go. It's unclear exactly how he ended up in the wild, but it is assumed that he was either abandoned or ran away. Number 4. In 2007, a young woman was found living in a jungle in Cambodia after she had disappeared nearly 20 years earlier. The woman was found after a local noticed that food had gone missing from his lunchbox. He searched the area and found the young woman in the wild in terrible condition. Police were called to the scene and the woman was recognized by her father because of a distinct scar on her back. The girl was taken to a nearby medical facility for examination. She was in rough shape, but was expected to make a full recovery. She was only able to speak 3 words and was largely unresponsive to modern social activities such as games. Her parents stood by her side through every step of her progress, but the girl eventually escaped the facility and fled back into the jungle in May of 2010. She has still not been located to this day. Number 3. In 2008, Russian police were informed of an awful situation in which a mother had been raising her son as though he were a bird. The 31-year-old woman was reported to have been the owner of many different birds and simply caged her son with the birds and refused to speak with him. She would only appear when it was time to feed him and would then leave him alone with the birds once more. The boy had learned to chirp like a bird and would only communicate by chirping and flapping his arms, even though he was 7 years old. Police believe that his mother had been treating him like this for his entire life, raising him as a pet rather than a child. Number 2. Oksana was the name given to a young girl who researchers believe had been raised by wild dogs for her entire life. The girl had been living behind her family home with a pack of wild dogs in a rundown shed. She only communicated with barks and insisted on walking on all fours. She now resides in a mental institution for troubled adults and is estimated to be about 36 years old. Number 1. A young boy named Andre was born with hearing and speaking disabilities, which resulted in his parents abandoning him in the wild, assuming he would perish from the elements. However, the boy was miraculously adopted by a wild guard dog who taught him how to survive and live on his own. The boy eventually developed strong teeth, much like a dog, and would sniff all his food before eating it. He was generally afraid of humans and would react unpredictably quite often. The boy was taken to a medical facility and was rehabilitated. It is unknown how long he managed to live in the wild, but he began to make major improvements in his living abilities within just 2 weeks of capture. Which of these cases did you find most incredible? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to click that like button and notification bell to let us know you made it to the end of the video.